Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Welcome to my crazy world. It's Monday or Wednesday. I don't even know what day it is today. Don't pay any attention to me. I'm sorry. I've got a major migraine. I'm trying to do like 5 things at one time, and nothing's going the way I want it to go. So, anyway, we have a Wayback Wednesday today about a special holiday, sort of, day. Anyway, one of those national days Joe decided was interesting. Hopefully you'll find it interesting as well. Kind of interesting information, if I'm honest myself. Not a members video, which is nice for those of you who do not, who are not members. You'll get to get a special national day randomly because Joe said so. Anyway, on to our race. We're doing a job race because there are firefighters involved in our job race. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Everybody's lined up, and we're going to start. There we go. All right, we got Hiking Ontario, Fractured, there's Stony, there's Bobby, there's Raven, there's Conscious, there's Northern Woman, Tammy, Mike's Garden, Sea Tripping, Steve and Tina, there's Tammy, Laura, David and Marcy, my Linda, there's Cruise Nuts, there's Peach, there's Popcorn, there's Giraffe, Dirt Diggers is over there, Black Beauty is there, there's Hillbillies, which I thought I took you out of there because we just did them yesterday, but that's alright. There's Big Ben, there's Rowdy, and Zol. Looks like Zol's gonna win in a minute. Alright, and this is Miss Zol's channel. She's at 3,950 subscribers. And this is sort of a vlog. As you can see, there's food. I'm here, traveling a little bit. We've got some shorts, which is pets and food. And then her lives, which is what I catch most of the time. And those are just kind of hangout vloggy logs. So check her out and enjoy the video. Record. Okay, we're going to tell you something hopefully interesting. Maybe. If not, it's Joe's fault.
It's all my fault.
I did not make a list this week, so it's his fault.
It's all my fault.
He made choices.
I made choices. It might be a bad choice, but it's something that, I felt was important. It's kind of interesting. And, for folks around here, it's one of those things that you hope you never need, but if
always
you
want.
do, you're going to want it. We noticed this pop up a couple days ago, and it's the recognition for the National Volunteer Firefighters Day. The recognition came on the 18th of August, was originally put into proclamation by President Reagan at the time, back in 1984. And it basically talks about the fact that how much our country both is in service to, volunteer firemen, but also what, these folks do on a day in and day out basis is both kind of incredible, but also you almost feel that they don't get the recognition that they deserve. Because let's look at the first basics. Okay, take South Dakota for example. Okay, we have 2 primary cities. You've got Rapid City on the west. You've got Sioux Falls on the east. You've got a couple major towns that probably have regular firemen. They're the guys that earn a salary. They may work full time, they may work part time. Some of them work with ambulance crews. Some of them are strictly firemen. You know, they have their companies. Now, Rapid City, for example, if I remember right, I think we've got a total of 7 or 8 separate fire department buildings. You've got main one, you've got 2, you've got 3, which if I remember right is search and rescue. You've got number 8, which is out at the airport. They are all interconnected to the Rapid City Fire Department group. Now, what's interesting is that you do also have, because of the size of the city, you do have volunteer fire departments in the area. You've got the North Haines Volunteer Fire Department. We've been to that building. We've got a video of them pushing one of their new trucks in. We've actually been to the Rapid Valley Volunteer Fire Department out, you guessed it, in Rapid Valley. And it's a neat building. You know, it's all, I remember when they were originally constructing it. It's a beautiful building inside. It's got huge bays. But it also showcases the fact that, you know, a lot of those volunteer fire departments run off of, they have open houses, they have pancake feeds, they have the support from the community, which helps them replace and update and upgrade their equipment as it's needed. But the other thing to think about, and it's kind of interesting because I've seen the stat line vary a little bit across the country. I've seen some people say that it's 54% of our fire companies are volunteer. I've seen it as high as 75%. Here in South Dakota, it's over 90% of companies in our towns and villages and, you know, areas that are supported by volunteer fire departments. Now, for those of the folks that live in the big cities, the big thing to realize is that a lot of our small communities, you know, they're not huge. Some of them don't even have a regular store, but they still have that community vibe. I can think of about a dozen places that you'll see the firehouse there, and you go, doesn't look like it's very busy. Well, that's because with a volunteer fire department, you know, Ed might be out there, might be cutting the grass, or Charlie might be out there, you know, running a tractor. You know, Abe might be down the road, you know, taking care of Mike's corn. You know, they don't really see a lot of activity unless, you guessed it, service is called for. And sometimes it might be something simple. It might be they might have a fire in a field. They might have some idiot that decided to start a campfire and forgot about it. Heaven forbid, I've seen that 3 times this week. But the big thing is that those folks have to take time away from what they're doing in their regular day, run for a unit, and, you know, then head on down the road. The good thing with what they've got right now is communication. You know, back a good 40 years ago, when this was originally made as a proclamation, what these guys relied on was either CB radios, walkie-talkies, or dispatch. You know, nowadays, you know, people have cell phones. They have the ability to coordinate with each other. Some companies have even gone one step further. We've got a place out here that's called Castle Rock. And Castle Rock is an interesting place because it's at the intersection of 2 major roads. One that goes north from Newell, one that goes across to Highway 85, and then the other one goes up to Riva. Now, if there's a fire anywhere along one of those 3 roads, the Castle Rock people, they actually take their fire trucks to their ranches, so that, you know, if all of a sudden we need, you know, a fire truck up by, let's just borrow the small township of Hoover, okay? It's got a whopping population of 5. Well, all of a sudden the word gets out to these guys. They say, well, there's been a fire at one of the houses. Well, they'll know to take those trucks and they'll just go straight to the town, because it might be, you know, 10 minutes, 5 minutes faster for them to go straight from the ranch instead of having to come all the way over to Castle Rock, grab an engine, wait for the other guys to get there, and then drive off 45 minutes later. You know, it's the fast dispatch that helps these companies. Now, the other aspect to look at, and a lot of it again comes down to community. We went down to the Southern Hills one time, to a little tiny place. Remember Argyle?
I remember Argyle, sort of.
Argyle was such a unique little adventure because we actually drove past the so-called town, quote unquote town. We drove around the loop by Argyle. The only thing we saw that constituted a community there was the firehouse. But it's a big firehouse. There's like 4 or 5 bays there. And so, you know, again, it's a point of communication for the community. From what I've seen earlier, they do have a pancake feed there as well. They're always looking for volunteers. And again, it's that giving back to the community that kind of bonds this group of folks that live out there, you know, whether they're farmers, they're ranchers, they take and might work up in Custer, they might work down by Hot Springs, they might work in Pringle, but they all serve that community. And the nice thing about that also is that, you know, with a regular station like that, if you've got a deployment group of about, say, 20 firemen, you can have the 7 or 8 guys you need deploy with 1 engine. You still have an extra brush truck, an extra ambulance for those other crews to depart and go serve more companies. Just a couple days ago, we were down by a little town called Edgemont, and we were like, well, you know, it might be kind of fun to stop in here, see the engines, see if you can pick up David a shirt. Well, interestingly enough, I pulled open their page, and they had been out to 2 separate fires in 2 days. They had one that went all the way to a place called West Road, and then they had one up by Minnetonka that they had to go handle. And that's not to mention the extra companies that, you know, this firehouse is rather funny because it's actually built right next to a auto body shop. It's the first one I've ever seen that it's a multi-purpose building with a business on one side and the firehouse on the other. But, you know, again, it's serving a community. And then you've got not only that volunteer fire department there, but they also respond to calls in town. And it might be things like, you know, there was an automobile accident. They had to use the jaws of life to open a door. Again, it might be somebody's field of hay caught on fire. Might be lightning strikes. We've seen a lot of lightning in the last 2 weeks. And all it does is it takes into play a couple guys spot smoke. They send out the word, and then the dispatch will call out to these firehouses and say, yeah, we've got a fire. Good example. They had one pop up down by Hot Springs. Well, it was in a place that there is literally no roads to. And so these poor fire guys had to actually hike down into a canyon, back up the other side, and cut across the plain to find where the fire was. They had a second crew that had to come and do the same thing, and they were actually not even there to fight the fire. They were there to help the firemen who might have suffered heat exhaustion, they might have suffered a burn. They basically were helping the smoke jumpers, the guys that jump out of airplanes. Because of some of those fires, it was the easiest thing for them to do was to just deploy from a plane going over. Now, with your other fire companies, the other factor that gets kind of fun with these guys is where they wind up being dispatched out to. We went to a little tiny place called Fairburn a couple times. Fairburn's got a beautiful new fire station. Their old fire station was kind of quaint, and it's built into a hillside.
That was kind of cranky.
Yeah. The wooden front door, you'd love to go wander inside it just to see what's still in there. But they built a new fire company to the southeast, closer to the outlying area where the Fairburn agates are found. But they got a call, interestingly enough, to go help fight fires down in Colorado. They went and did about 3 weeks in northern Colorado, and then they got called to a second fire down by a place called Stoner Butte. I kid you not. Colorado, I don't know what was going on there, but the thing is that, we see a lot of our volunteer fire departments, they'll dispatch engines at the drop of a hat because, it gives these crews training so they stay fresh. They learn about conditions that they might be able to use up here. I remember earlier in this summer cycle, they actually had a couple fires start right close to 79, and Fairburn had to handle those too. And that's the other upshot that some of these stations have, that you'll have 3 to 5 crews that you'll have usually one brush truck, you'll have a regular engine, there might be an ambulance on staff depending on how big the station is, and then you might have a second brush truck just for the local area. Fairburn, for those of you who haven't seen the video, is a really quaint little town. There's, I believe, one church, there's a post office, there used to be an old school and a new school, both are closed, and then there's about maybe 12 to 14 buildings. So it's, it's got a little hub of activity, people come and go, but no stores. So, if there's any need, medical, they're either going down the road to Hot Springs or they're coming up to Rapid, And then again for community, if there's an accident, interestingly enough, in the Southern Hills, they had a semi roll over. It was carrying 40,000 pounds of honey. Needless to say, I cannot imagine how much of a mess that was to try to clean up.
Again, I would not try to clean that up.
No, I just,
Spray off the road and I'm calling it good.
Yeah,
that's it.
we're
the
down
rest
there,
is up to the nature.
Ants could go and have a field day on both sides of the road, but they showed a picture of that semi on its roof, and I'm like, oh, I cannot. The guy apparently is okay. He was injured, but not severely. But he was up on what's called Fall River Road, and that's out in the middle of nowhere. But they'll have truck fires on 79, which is right close to Fairburn, about a mile away. Fairburn actually can be reached from 2 different directions, from the north and then directly from the west. But then you got other towns, again, that, they have fire companies. You've got volunteer fire departments in the Southern Hills in Hot Springs, which is actually a bigger town than some of the ones we've got. As mentioned, Argyle. Pringle has a fire company. There is Custer, which is kind of interesting that Custer is all volunteer too. Custer, you see them a lot of active from them. Plus, they also have a separate group that handles search and rescue for the tourists who happen to get lost in Custer State Park.
Because that happens a lot.
That happens like about every other day down there. And it's usually, pardon the phrase, doing things that they don't think about, like taking enough water, twisting an ankle, you know, doing stuff that most of us would probably go, why did you do that? But, you know, they're on vacation, they don't know any better. Or, sadly, they've had some choo-choo pop, and they make poor decisions. We won't mention people doing that. But you also have, when you get into the Central Hills, Rochford, Hill City, Keystone, you have Hermosa. And interestingly enough, Hermosa, Hayward, and Keystone now all run under the same banner, which is the Battle Creek Fire Department. And they're three great companies that operate in a variety of places up through the canyons up there. We actually got to see an open house at Hayward, and that was kind of a fun adventure.
We did?
Yeah. We had a burger up there, the hot dogs.
Which one was that?
Hayward. That was right in the middle between Hermosa and Keystone.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's like right next to the road. It was a nice station. I think they only had 2 bays though. Yeah, friendly folks though. But then as you go further along, Rochford is up there, and they're kind of stuck up back in the woods. But again, they serve a purpose. They're out there. We also discovered that there's a fire department in the Southern Hills at Angostura that I can imagine a lot of their stuff is either for boat accidents, campfire incidences, and they're right next to a place that has a lot of tourists who come through because it's a huge lake. You know, they get to run their boats back and forth. And some great fishing. They got catfish down there. They're huge. But then back to the Central Hills, you know, you've got Rapid City. Depending on which way you leave Rapid, there's Doty, that's up there a little ways. There's Nemo. You've got on the other side, I'm trying to remember, I don't think Caputa or Farmingdale have fire departments anymore. I think they finally effectively closed those off. They do have one in Scenic, though, which is kind of funny because Scenic isn't really much of a town now. But somebody said, you know, just because there's a lot of people that live out in this neck of the woods, we're going to keep a fire department presence out here. And we got to see the fire station. Nobody was there, so we couldn't go in it. Of course, there's also a fire department way out there at Folsom, a little 2-bay station that we saw one time. And so there's that one there. Then as you go further both north and to the west, interestingly enough, there is one in the Spearfish Canyon. That's exactly what they call it, Spearfish Canyon Volunteer Fire Department. It's a little bit north of the Cheyenne Crossing. And then, of course, the other direction, you have Lead has a station, Deadwood has a station, Sturgis has a station. There isn't one in Central City, though. I was always curious about that, but they probably figured that with the 2 big boys, we don't need one here in the middle. But they do have one south of the Lead Deadwood. They have one called Brownsville, and it's a pretty good sized one. It's got about 4 bays, and they did upgrade it because they used to have one that was closer to Inglewood, but they finally built a new building, and so that's where they're stationed at there. And as you go north, Spearfish has got, interesting enough, they have a volunteer fire department. We got to go see that one. The boy, that's where he got one of his first shirts. And they actually have 2 stations, because they got the main one in downtown, and then there's a second one over by, if I remember it, I think it's exit 10 in the northern part of Spearfish too. And then off of those bunch, as you go north, there's Belfouche, there's St. Ange, Whitewood is up there on the interstate. And then as you go around the other way, interestingly enough, Fort Meade has a volunteer fire department.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that building.
Yeah, and you're like wondering, well, I wonder if they're active or not, but apparently they still are. I figure they're that far out. You know, if there's something that happens down Highway 212 or 34, they could deploy that way. Because once you go down 34, you know, unless you find something on the 79, you've got Vale. You also have the one at Newell. And of course, you know, not Camp Crook, but up at Castle Rock. Out 34, the next nearest things you have, there probably was one at one time at Volunteer, which would make sense.
Maybe.
Town of Volunteer doesn't have volunteer fire department.
Volunteer.
The volunteer fire department. I would love to see that building.
I would love to just see like their sign.
Yes.
Because you're going,
Wow,
okay,
what?
then.
But as you go down 34, you think about there is Union Center. We know there's a station at Enning. We've seen it. There's also a station, interestingly enough, at Red Owl. Although the last time we were up there, they had an engine for Enning at the Red Owl sign, which I'm kind of like, okay, are they just guarding it for the time being, or are they going to use it for both purposes? But when you get into some of those other small towns up there, I know Oral has Opal has a volunteer fire department. Both Smithwick and Oral have fire departments. And interestingly enough, down on the Oglala Lakota reservation, there's some fire companies through there too. Pine Ridge has some. Kyle has a fire department. Batesland has a fire department. And if I remember right, Norris has one. And then there's the, I'm trying to remember the name of it. There's a valley up there south of Kadoka that we went through. And I think we even saw the fire department that's set up down there. But it's, you know, down there close to the Nebraska line. But then further into, you know, Meade County and some of those big rural open areas, you've got Faith. From what I remember, there's supposed to be one way out there by Howes. But I would have no idea where they would even put it. As you get further into that northern area, there's one in Lemon, there's one in Bison, there's one in Meadow, there's one at Gan Valley. And if I remember, there's even one in Ludlow, which is kind of interesting. Because Ludlow has a population of 3, but the interesting part about it is that's because all the people that do business in Ludlow don't live in the city limits. They live around it. What a concept. It also helps them keep the taxes down.
Mm.
But as you go through those areas there, you know, again, they don't have to have that many buildings to be considered part of the community, but as long as they've got volunteers that are willing to put out the work. The one thing that's also kind of fun, it's when I look at it from Rapid City, if an incident happens on I-90 or up in the hills on, you know, either 44 or 79, they'll usually tell you what companies have sent out fire trucks. They had one that actually took place north of the town, and it was up in a, you know, little rural area, maybe a good 4 miles north of the town. Well, they had fire trucks come out from Piedmont, Blackhawk, Doty, the South Dakota Interagency Company had officers show up, Rapid City Fire Department, North Haines Volunteer Fire Department. You know, all these companies said, oh, there's a fire, let's go help. And that's pretty much the big thing that these companies do, is that they're all working together to try to help each other. And it's kind of amazing that they do that here. And, you know, these volunteers, they give up time with their family from their work, You know, all of a sudden it comes in on one of their lines on a phone and says, you know, we need help out here. The, probably the craziest one that I've read about, there's a place that we visited a couple times. It's called Ardmore, way down by the Nebraska border. Okay. They have a firehouse, but they don't use it. They take their engines, they go out to their farms, but the nicest guys, they're like, hey, you know, if you ever want to see the firehouse, just let us know when you'll be by. We'll let you in, you can walk around, you can see all the stuff. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. Well, interestingly enough, when Nebraska was having problems with fires down in the Panhandle, they were one of the first groups to go out on their own. They said, you know, we've got to stop this fire because with the winds blowing up from the south, this could threaten where we live. This could threaten our ranches. And so they loaded up 4 units. They head right across the state line. And they helped put a damper on at least 3 fires that I can think of, including one that was down there by Crawford, interestingly enough. But it's that neighbor willing to help out other neighbors. That's pretty awesome. Now, one of the other little goodies that I was going to mention, you know, being the bearded historian and everything, I dug up bits and pieces of good stuff. You know, they talk about the difference between a regular fireman and a volunteer fireman. Again, a lot of it comes down
One's
to money.
paid and one's not.
Yeah. Well, the volunteers do get some stipend from the federal government for what they do, but you're not going to pay the bills.
You can't
with it.
live on it.
No.
So it doesn't really count as anything. It's just kind of, meh, here you go.
Yeah. Thank you for saving a life. Here's a quarter. Now, interestingly enough, the first firefighting organizations made up of volunteers dates all the way back to Rome in 6 AD. They were called the Corps of Vigiles, established in...
Makes them sound like food.
Yes, ancient Rome. But then it also talks about fire departments in other countries. Argentina had a company that first formed in 1884. Interestingly enough, from an Italian immigrant, Thomas Liberty, in the neighborhood of La Boca in Buenos Aires. Now they, interestingly enough, their day of volunteer firefighters is on June the 2nd. The Argentina Foundation of Volunteer Firefighters was founded in 1954, and as of 2018, 80% of their country is covered by volunteers.
That's just stupid.
Yeah. Australia, they have a horrible time with fires. Them and Canada both. Well, part of Australia's problem isn't the lack of firefighters, it's the lack of modern equipment. Okay? Many volunteer fire agencies set up individual states and territories. New South Wales is serviced by 2 statutory firefighting authorities, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and the Fire and Rescue New South Wales. The Fire and Rescue has firefighting and rescue responsibilities for the major cities, metropolitan areas, and several other towns in the New South Wales. It also has responsibility for all land-based hazmat incidents, as well as inland waterway-based hazmat incidents. The NSWRFS is the volunteer firefighting service, consisting of over 70,000 volunteers, and has responsibility for over 90% of the land area within New South Wales. Now, although most of this is brush and grassland, they also serve smaller and regional communities that are not covered by the fire and rescue. Now, Victoria, there are 3 main firefighting organizations: the Metropolitan Fire and Emergency Services Board, the Country Fire Authority, and the Department of Environment, Water, Land, and Planning. Sounds like way too much bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
The CFA is volunteer, community-based fire and emergency services. It's made up of about 61,000 members. Of those members, 59,000 of them were all volunteer. Now, their roles range from fire, rescue, hazmat, to non-operational support roles. Now, Western Australia, they got the toolies. Firefighting is organized by the Department of Fire and Emergency Services together with local councils. The DFES operates the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Service Brigades and some Bush Fire Service Brigades, while the remainder of the Bush Fire Service Brigades is trained by the DFES, but operated and administered by the Council of Associated Area. These brigades are generally more involved in structure fire fighting, asset protection, and road crash rescue, depending on their location, whereas the BFS brigades are generally more involved in wildlife fire fighting. In Western Australia, there's an estimated 31,000 BFS members in 585 brigades and 2,000 volunteer fire reserves members in 88 brigades. Now, South Australia, there are two legislated firefighting organizations, the South Australian Metropolitan Fire Service and the South Australian Country Fire Services. They are staffed by 13,500 volunteer firefighters and around 120 paid employees. Quite a lot of volunteers compared.
Yes.
Now, Austria and Germany. The volunteer fire departments make up 97% of the German firefighters in Austria and Germany's civil protection services, alongside other volunteer organizations like the German Federal Agency for Technical Relief, Voluntary Ambulance Services, and Emergency Medical or Rescue Services like the German Red Cross or Johanna Unfall Heilif. In most rural fire departments, the staff consists only of volunteers. These members of these departments are usually on call 24/7 and working in other professions.
I just don't understand that.
Yeah, I can't put the tire on the car right now. I got to go out. The alarm can be performed by different alarm systems such as sirens or pagers, sometimes combined with an app on the mobile phone. In Germany, the alarm via radio pagers on the frequencies of the BOS radio. In Austria, the fire departments have their own frequencies. Makes sense.
I mean, they haven't upgraded to apps for that yet?
They haven't forbid.
Well, they're behind times.
Yes. Now, in medium-sized cities and communities, fire departments will often be partially staffed by career firefighters. They ensure the rapid availability of some of the department's fire apparatus, with the remaining apparatus staffed and brought to the scene of the emergency by volunteers as soon as they arrive at the department. Larger cities, typically those with 100,000 inhabitants or more, will operate fire departments staffed entirely by career firefighters. However, they also typically have several volunteer fire departments who are called upon in cases of larger emergencies. Now, municipalities are the support of volunteer fire departments. Additional funding may include, for example, contributions from support organizations, donations made by fundraising, or income from various events. Now, Canada, we have actually sent companies to Canada to try to help with fires. And of course, Canada sends us smoke.
Smoke noises.
Smoke noises. Breathing is optional in those months. Don't worry about that. While wholly volunteer fire departments are mostly found in rural and remote areas of Canada, composite departments composed of both career and volunteer or call firefighters can be found in more urbanized municipalities. For example, the city of Kingston, Ontario, has a population of about 130,000. Of the 10 stations operated at Kingston Fire and Rescue Service, 3 are staffed with career firefighters, 2 are composite, and 5 are wholly volunteer. There's an estimated 127,000 volunteer firefighters across the country. Most urban and larger fire services began as volunteer service and evolved into full-time members. Volunteer departments are necessary for areas that cannot afford to staff a full-time department. Unlike the United States, where volunteer fire companies may operate independently of local government with limited tax-based support, or as semi-private organizations, in Canada, volunteer fire departments are normally operated by municipalities or by counties. Provinces establish standards of equipment and training that volunteer departments must meet. Now, interesting item, and it's one thing that I have also read here. There are times that they'll have cases where a certain company cannot go into certain buildings. They're not trained to. One of the good examples of that is there was a fire down on Pine Ridge, and the building that was burning was a church. And by the time a second-story graded fire company could get there, they had to drive all the way from Kadoka. Now, Kadoka to Pine Ridge is a good hour and a half drive, depending on the roads, depending on the conditions, depending on how quickly they could get out the door. By the time they got there, the building was a total loss. Now, part of the problem that this stems off of is that the fire department down on Pine Ridge has not gotten the training that they need, which is kind of sucky if you ask me. Granted, they don't have that many two-story buildings or, equipment needed to handle these sorts of things. Get some, I know the Bureau of Indian Affairs handles a lot of things like that. By all means, open the pocketbooks and let's get some training going down there. Granted, of course, the other problem is that there's other fire companies that have kind of been run into the ground because either the people don't care anymore, or they wind up discovering that somebody has stripped out the fire truck and the firehouse isn't even worth salvaging. Kind of sad both ways. The other problem that they have with some of these companies is the training aspect of it. There's a lot of rules and regulations that they have to meet to go through the processes. Just recently, New Underwood was trying to address that problem, and it wound up leading to a mass exodus of the fire department people that were there. Quite a bit of discussion came out of it later. They are restaffed. They were able to hire more staff and start getting them trained, which is good, because you'd hate to have a community that big and all of a sudden, there's a fire. Who do we send?
Yeah, it's a lot of problems at times. It's not just money, because you have to pay for these classes, and it usually comes out of the volunteers, quote unquote,
right,
pockets.
Yeah.
They also have to pay for the equipment out of pocket.
Yeah.
And they have to take away time from their job, so that's more money.
Yeah.
And so in this day and age, that's not something a lot of people can do, especially in our rural areas.
Interesting enough, we saw one thing, with the Sturgis rally that just got done up here. Deadwood was trying to raise money to take and get new equipment because, like, for example, the Jaws of Life, everybody's seen them in movies and stuff. The ones that they have there, they were talking about, normally they like to have them get replaced when they get to 20, 25 years old. The ones that they're operating with are like 30. And so, doing that upgrade, they just got done having an open house before the rally. And then, of course, during the rally, they were trying to sell off shirts, buttons, magnets, and stuff like that to help make funding. In fact, they're also, interestingly enough, there is I'm trying to remember the name of the program, Party Light demo that one of the people was going to put together to try to raise funds for the firehouse, which is kind of an interesting way to do it. And then likewise, Lead is going to be auctioning off one of their old units to try to make money to get more modern as the time goes. So fire companies will do different things to try to make ends meet. Now, next country up, interestingly enough, is Chile. You think about Chile, big, long country. It's one of the few countries in the world where all of the firefighters are unpaid. Now, they share common values and a rich history of serving their country. The country is divided into regions, provinces, and communes, local fire corps or departments, and serve across single or multiple communes. As of today, there are 314 fire corps currently operating. All fire corps are part of the Junta Nacional de Bomberos, the National Board of Firefighters. This one's interesting. Croatia. There's 1,768 volunteer fire departments. As well, 33 units of what are officially called volunteer fire department in economy.
What?
Yeah, apparently it's that must be the ones that are paid, which is very
Okay,
weird.
then.
Yeah. Estonia. The first volunteer fire team in Estonia, interestingly enough, and this just sounds so weird, 1788 by the Brotherhood of Blackheads.
Sounds like they need a medical treatment.
Badly, yeah. The first organization of volunteer firemen in 1862, also being the first such organization in Imperial Russia. Now, volunteer fire organizations existed all through the political systems in Estonia since then, although have caused significant setbacks in political purges following Soviet occupation. Don't the Soviets always screw things up?
Always.
Volunteer fire brigades were the backbone of rescue services before re-independence, owning around 3/4 of the rescue equipment, personnel, and also handling about 3/4 of all fires, primarily in rural areas. In 2010, the nation's volunteer fire brigades were united under an umbrella organization, the Rescue Union, also included chimney sweeping, water rescue, and similar organizations. Well, in 2021, there were 117 volunteer fire brigades, making up 62% of all fire brigades, with a total of 2,319 volunteer firemen, about half of the Estonian rescue personnel. Volunteer fire brigades are placed in rural areas or in satellite areas of cities and towns, kind of like here. Other small islands such as Naisar and Abertka, the volunteer fire brigades are the only rescue brigades. In a few cases, volunteer brigades are attached to the national ones. Due to being placed in primarily rural areas, they're often the first to arrive at the scene. Volunteer organizations are funded through support via the national or local municipal budget, companies, and donations. One thing that I do also remember, and it was kind of hit home when it talked about the Rapid Valley Fire Department. They were talking with one of the guys, and I think it was the fire chief, and he said the thing is crazy is I remember when I was growing up, there were times that they had on staff 10 firemen, and other times they'd have 50 firemen. Depending on how often that sometimes they had so many that wanted to be firemen, they had a waiting list. But, like we've talked about, the biggest problem right now, economy-wise, is nobody could afford to volunteer. Because, when you were going to college, they're like, well, you could always volunteer to do work. You can't afford to.
Here's how you get your work experience, you volunteer. And I'm like, I'd love to. Except,
I can't pay my bills with good works, My rent, my landlord wouldn't accept it, But the big thing is that it's kind of nice to know that, for these places that live out there, I can't imagine if there weren't fire departments up 79, down 79, down I-90.
Yeah.
Because, if there was a fire in Wall, could you imagine waiting an hour for a fire truck to show up? I couldn't. But this has been the Bearded Historian with a little tidbit dating back to 1984. And if you see a volunteer fire department, go in, shake a hand, maybe bake some cookies, drop off a card, let them know that we do think about you and we're glad you guys are there to help us. But Bearded Historian says, folks, have a good week. We'll see you next week.
No.
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 No.